Before the network cameras could even adjust, Donald Trump turned a routine White House presser into a televised execution of Ilhan Omar's entire political career. The 47th President of the United States gripped the heavy edges of the mahogany podium, his knuckles turning pale under the intense glare of the studio lights, his entire posture projecting an unyielding, almost gravitational authority that instantly commanded the vast space. He was not standing there merely to offer polite platitudes to commence Police Week. He was deliberately convening a ruthless, inescapable. Surrounding him on all sides stood a formidable, stoic phalanx of uniformed officers, a literal, impenetrable wall of silver and blue formed by the very men and women who put their lives on the line every single day to keep America safe from the encroaching darkness. Their polished metal badges and immaculately crisp uniforms caught the brilliant, cascading light of the grand crystal chandeliers overhead, creating a staggering visual fortress of law and order. This breathtaking tableau stood in stark, deliberate, and highly calculated contrast to the political elite who were already shifting uneasily in the velvet-roped rows before him, sensing that the atmosphere had shifted from celebratory to dangerous. When Donald Trump finally opened his mouth to speak, his signature baritone voice did not merely echo off the historic walls. It completely dominated the room, slicing through the heavy, expectant silence like a meticulously sharpened blade cutting through silk. Since I took office, our administration has made nearly 200,000 criminal arrests nationwide, a record, he declared, his voice a low rumble of absolute certainty, laying down the first heavy brick in a fortress of undeniable statistical facts. He was deliberately and methodically trapping the radical left in a corner where their usual emotional rhetoric and highly produced media talking points could not possibly survive. And we're getting them off the streets and putting them in jail, or in many cases, sending them back to their lovely countries where they came from, he continued, his cadence methodical, unrelenting, and utterly devastating to the progressive narrative. He demanded absolute, unquestioning submission to the hard data, proudly announcing that in the previous year, the national murder rate saw its single largest decline in recorded American history, to the lowest level in over 125 years before my father was born 125 years ago, the year 1900, he emphasized, pausing to let the sheer crushing magnitude of that reality sink deep into the plush carpets of the room and the minds of the millions watching at home. This was not a mere political talking point woven together by campaign consultants for a Sunday morning news show. It was a living, breathing testament to a nation aggressively and unapologetically reclaiming its sovereign streets from the suffocating grip of anarchy. But the 47th president was not even close to finished, and the methodical barrage of executive triumphs continued without a second of hesitation. He did not deal in vague poetic metaphors or elusive focus group promises. He dealt exclusively in the cold, hard steel of reality. Stating the figures with absolute, unshakable finality, he revealed that the Department of Homeland Security had aggressively removed nearly 615,000 illegal alien criminals from the interior of the country over the past 12 consecutive months. Think of that. 615,000, Trump repeated, his voice dropping an octave, allowing the staggering, unprecedented number to hang, suspended in the conditioned air as a towering monument to a border finally secured in a massive domestic purge of imported chaos. And then came the pause, a brilliantly calculated, masterful, and utterly agonizing silence that stretched just long enough to practically suffocate the entire room. The rhythmic, pounding delivery of his administration's law enforcement triumphs abruptly halted. Trump's expression hardened visibly, the conventional, smiling pride of a victorious commander-in-chief instantly melting away, replaced by the terrifying, predatory focus of a seasoned prosecutor who had just successfully cornered a profoundly hostile witness on the stand. A cold, knowing, and deeply dangerous smirk played at the corner of his mouth as he slowly, methodically swept his gaze over the distinguished VIP section. He entirely bypassed the rows of decorated military generals, ignored his most loyal and attentive cabinet members, and locked his eyes with the terrifying, unblinking precision of a sniper onto one specific, highly controversial seat. There, in the front rows, sat Representative Ilhan Omar. She was draped comfortably in the very privileges, luxuries, and protections of the republic she so frequently and passionately sought to dismantle, serving in that very moment as the living, breathing embodiment of the radical ideology he was actively tearing down brick by brick. The psychological contrast in the room became violently electric, the air crackling with an almost unbearable kinetic energy. The battle-tested, quiet professionals of law enforcement flanking the president stood tall and resolute, while the progressive congresswoman was suddenly and violently pinned under the inescapable, suffocating weight of his prolonged stare. The tension in the East Room snapped tight, vibrating like an over-torqued piano wire. Every single person in the audience felt it in their chests, and the blinking red lenses of the network cameras sensed the historic collision that was about to unfold. When Donald Trump finally broke the agonizing silence, his booming, rally-style declarations were completely gone, replaced instead by a lethal, biting, and whispered sarcasm that hit its mark with devastating, pinpoint accuracy. "You know," he began, his voice dropping to a dangerously quiet, intimate register that dripped with an icy, mocking realization, "hearing about these massive, record-breaking numbers of deported criminals, I can't help but notice it might be making a few special guests in this very room feel a little homesick." He did not blink. He held her defiant gaze, instantly weaponizing her own highly publicized background against her in an absolute, unapologetic masterclass of brutal political combat. Homesick for a country where they have nothing but crime, bedlam, filth. A horrible place, Trump continued, his words cutting through the tense air of the White House like jagged shards of glass. They say it may be the worst place. He paused once again, letting the deeply personal, geographically devastating insult settle over the VIP section like a heavy, suffocating fog before raising the hammer to drive the final nail into the political coffin. "Comes to our country," he scoffed, leaning into the microphone, which amplified the raw, unfiltered disdain rattling in his chest. "And then she tells us how to run the United States of America. It's an amazing thing." He leaned even closer to the mahogany podium, pointing a figurative, inescapable finger straight at the beating heart of the progressive left, and dropped her name like a heavy wooden gavel in a dead silent courtroom. Ilhan Omar. The delivery was smooth, painfully precise, and profoundly unapologetic. In a single, breathless, and historic moment, he had mercilessly exposed the ultimate, glaring hypocrisy of the progressive elite. Here was a politician sitting perfectly comfortable in the safest, most heavily guarded room on the planet, shielded by the very law enforcement officers she publicly despised and sought to defund, while actively utilizing her legislative power to import the exact same lawless bedlam her own homeland could never escape. The trap had been flawlessly set, the bait had been forcefully taken, and the public trial of the radical left had officially begun. The name Ilhan Omar lingered in the chilled air of the East Room like a noxious, invisible fume. The silence that immediately followed was deafening, suffocating, and total. You could physically feel the progressive establishment insiders and the mainstream media reporters stationed at the back of the room desperately clutching their pearls, their pens frozen mid-stroke in a state of absolute, unadulterated shock. The tension was a tightly coiled spring ready to snap, but Donald Trump, acting as a master conductor of high-stakes political theater, did not let the spring release just yet. Instead of continuing the relentless personal barrage, he completely and abruptly changed the emotional frequency of the room. Letting the dark, heavy shadow of his accusation hang over the rigid congresswoman, he turned his body slightly, shifting his entire focus away from the progressive architects of chaos and directing his complete reverence toward the frontline defenders of order. "But you know, folks," Trump began, his voice softening just a fraction, abandoning the sarcasm to take on a tone of profound, patriotic, and genuine reverence. "While some politicians build their entire careers on importing chaos, tearing down our laws, and complaining about the country that gave them everything, We have real men and women who build a wall of flesh and blood to stop them. He scanned the endless rows of blue uniforms with deep, authentic admiration. I want to recognize one hero who exemplifies the amazing courage our police officers show each and every day, Trump announced, the unshakable pride evident in the rising cadence of his voice. He called out Assistant Chief Aaron Edwards from the NYPD, New York's finest. Shielding his eyes from the blinding glare of the crystal chandeliers, Trump actively searched the massive crowd. "Where's Aaron? Where are you, Aaron?" "Ah, great. Hello, Aaron. Good-looking guy. I love the NYPD. Great people." A massive wave of genuine heartfelt applause washed over the grand room as the veteran officer stood to acknowledge the commander-in-chief. But Trump was not merely handing out a polite, standard-issue presidential commendation. He was systematically weaponizing the officer's undeniable heroism to brutally expose the absolute moral bankruptcy of the radical left. Gripping the podium tightly and leaning intimately into the microphone, he began to recount a harrowing story with the relentless, heart-pounding rhythm of a cinematic thriller. "They've got to be respected by our elected officials. They have to be respected," Trump declared, laying the foundational, moral premise before diving headfirst into the chaos of the streets. He detailed how, just last March, Assistant Chief Edwards was on duty outside Gracie Mansion amidst what the press called clashing protesters. Trump deliberately let that highly sanitized, media-approved phrase hang in the air, fully aware of exactly how the left-wing networks framed these violent events as mostly peaceful, while American cities burned to the ground. The 47th president was here to violently strip away that rhetorical camouflage. And what happened? Trump's voice dropped to a grave, urgent, and terrifying register. Two radical Islamic terrorists threw explosive devices into the crowd, violently into the crowd. The massive room went dead silent once again as the stark, violent reality of the decaying urban streets was dragged straight into the pristine, secure halls of the White House. Trump recounted how Assistant Chief Edwards didn't form a special committee to discuss his feelings, nor did he ask the media for permission to act. His hands animated the split-second life-or-death decision as he described the officer jumping over a metal barricade and sprinting directly into the line of fire to violently apprehend one of the domestic terrorists. Looking directly at the press pool to ensure every single network camera was rolling and broadcasting to millions, Trump connected the micro-level bravery to the macro-level soul of the nation. He revealed, to the astonishment of the crowd, that this 2-3-year veteran of the NYPD was originally inspired to join the police force when he watched courageous officers running into the burning Twin Towers on September 11th. A collective, audible breath was drawn in the room. It was the ultimate American trauma forged beautifully into the ultimate American heroism of 2001. It had a profound impact, Trump said softly, nodding with deep respect at Edwards, noting that the officer had since helped arrest some really bad global terrorists. So, Assistant Chief Edwards, I want to thank you very much. I've heard about your record. Your record is very legendary. Congratulations. As thunderous, room-shaking applause erupted in a rare moment of pure, undeniable patriotic unity, Trump absolutely refused to let the political left hide safely behind the clapping. As the noise slowly subsided, he did not look at the scrambling media, nor did he look at the cheering officers. Slowly, deliberately, his predatory gaze drifted right back to the VIP section, locking right back onto Ilhan Omar. The profound warmth in his eyes vanished entirely, replaced instantly by a chilling, terrifying gleam, a transition so sharp and severe it felt like a violent drop in barometric pressure. You see, ladies and gentlemen, Trump's voice purred menacingly through the speakers, dripping with a sarcasm so thick and toxic it could strip paint from the walls. It really is a staggering, beautiful irony, isn't it? We just honored a man who threw his own body toward an explosive device planted by radical Islamic terrorists who want to see this country burn. He leaned heavily on the mahogany podium, tilting his head slightly as if studying a particularly disturbing, unnatural exhibit in a museum of political horrors. And yet, it is deeply, deeply ironic that the terrorists throwing bombs out on the streets seemed to share the exact same ideology, the same visceral, ungrateful hatred for the American system as some of the people sitting right here. He didn't need to utter her name a second time. His laser-focused, unyielding stare did all the devastating talking. Omar sat completely rigid, her perceived political immunity utterly shattered in the glaring face of raw, unvarnished, undeniable truth. Gathering the full, crushing weight of a prosecutor delivering his final closing argument, Trump dramatically raised his voice to fill every corner of the room. They sat perfectly comfortable right here in the air conditioning of the White House, enjoying the luxury, the prestige, the unparalleled safety of this room, utilizing the very security provided by the police officers they constantly smear, demean, and want to defund. He was dissecting the hypocritical anatomy of the progressive establishment with the surgical precision of a master operator. He spat with righteous, vibrating indignation that they blatantly use the blood and sweat of brave men like Aaron Edwards to buy themselves the elite privilege of standing at a microphone to endlessly tell America how evil it is. They demand open borders for the world's worst, while hiding behind the biggest walls and the best men with guns. They hate the cops until the mob they incited gets a little too close to their neighborhood. It's a disgrace. It's an absolute disgrace. Let me tell you, folks, the establishment press those perfectly coiffed, perpetually outraged talking heads sitting nervously in the back row actually thought the Gracie Mansion story was the grand crescendo of the speech. They assumed the president was just executing the standard, polite, conservative back the blue routine. They were dead wrong. That was merely the overture to a surgical, devastating strike delivered with the raw, unfiltered instinct of a political apex predator. Trump didn't just let the suffocating silence settle, he actively weaponized it. He leaned casually against the podium, his righteous, booming fury suddenly evaporating into a relaxed, almost conversational, late-night swagger. This is the exact version of Donald Trump that the left fears the absolute most. The man who treats the presidency like an intimate fireside chat with 300 million patriots, slicing effortlessly through the bloated Washington jargon with sheer, unapologetic bluntness. You know, they don't like to talk about this on the networks, he boomed with a knowing conspiratorial smirk playing on his lips, looking warmly over the vast sea of blue uniforms. But I won about 98% of the police in this country. A low, deeply resonant chuckle rolled organically through the ranks of the hardened officers. In a deeply fractured, hyper-partisan political landscape, 98% was not just a mere margin of victory. It was an absolute, undeniable historical mandate. It was the ultimate proof that the men and women who actually faced the grit, the grime, and the real bullets of the dangerous world had overwhelmingly and unequivocally rejected the progressive utopian fantasy. In the press pen, a CNN producer frantically texted his editor in a panic, realizing Trump was going entirely off script, the tone shifting dangerously as he wound up for a massive blow. Trump caught the electric energy in the room and amplified it, his eyes narrowing with a theatrical, highly dangerous curiosity. He lowered his voice, dropping it into a hushed register that commanded absolute pin-drop attention. And honestly, we're trying to figure out who are the other 2%, he mused aloud, shaking his head in mock, exaggerated bewilderment, because nobody can figure that one out. The cops erupted into full-blown, echoing laughter, but the humor was a brilliantly disguised, razor-sharp Trojan horse meant to dissect the left's utter societal isolation. Leaning directly into the microphone, his voice dripping with venomous sarcasm, he asked, "Are they the ones sitting in a drum circle? Are they drinking oat milk lattes with the Antifa crowd while their precincts get defunded? Nobody knows. It defies human logic. You protect the streets. You put your lives on the line. You don't vote for the very politicians who want to put you in prison for doing your job while letting the criminals walk free without bail." Then, the emotional pendulum of the room swung violently once more. The amusement drained instantly from the president's face, replaced by a granite-like severity as his knuckles turned stark white, gripping the podium edges. The conversational, joking tone morphed instantly into an apocalyptic, terrifying warning. He was no longer mocking, He was rendering a historic verdict. Because let's be very, very clear, Trump roared, his baritone voice striking the room like a heavy gavel. Without you, we have bedlam. Bedlam. He bypassed the sanitized, bureaucratic terminology like civil unrest or societal instability, opting instead for a visceral word that smelled like tear gas and burning storefronts. He was violently forcing the room to look directly at the logical destructive terminus of the anti-police crusade. Without you, there is no law, there is no civilization, Trump hammered, the rhythm of his speech hitting the audience like heavy body blows. We have absolute unmitigated chaos. We have mobs tearing down our history and destroying the American dream, all while the hypocrite politicians hide behind their private armed security details. He paused, the air in the East Room turning brittle, cold, and immensely heavy, before slowly turning his head to verbally box Representative Ilhan Omar into an inescapable, humiliating corner of her own making. The suspense was a physical weight pressing down on the front rows. You want to know what a country looks like without law enforcement? Trump asked, his voice dropping an octave, razor sharp and slicing through the dead silence. You don't need to guess. Just ask some of the people right here telling us how to run our lives. Without you, we have Somalia. Boom. There it was. The word hung over the East Room like a heat-seeking missile aimed directly at the VIP section. He didn't scream it. He stated it with the chilling, emotionless finality of a coroner reading a cause of death. He took the ultimate progressive sacred cow, a congresswoman who had literally fled a collapsed, warlord-ravaged state and flawlessly weaponized her own origin story against her. It was a brilliant, devastating, airtight political trap. You fled the exact lawless hellhole you are now trying to recreate in my country. The press cameras flashed frantically in a blinding strobe effect as Omar sat completely frozen, the political immunity she usually wore like impenetrable armor completely shattered by this ruthless, inescapable indictment of her entire political existence. The word Somalia didn't just hang in the air. It detonated with the force of a bomb, and the suffocating silence of the East Room was violently punctured by the loud scrape of a wooden chair. Representative Ilhan Omar could no longer hide behind the plush velvet ropes of the VIP section. Her deeply ingrained political survival instincts kicked in, shattering the freeze. She stood up rapidly, her posture rigid, her voice trembling not with genuine fear, but with the highly practiced, manufactured, and theatrical outrage of the progressive left. Mr. President, this is an unprecedented and racist attack. Omar's voice sliced through the heavy murmurs of the room, her tone sharp, immediately demanding the shield of victimhood the mainstream media always so eagerly handed her. You are using the highest office in the land to peddle xenophobic smears against an elected official. My presence here is a testament to the American dream, and I will not let you. Your presence here is a testament to a broken system, Congresswoman. Trump fired back instantly, cutting her off completely. His voice did not rise to a desperate shout. Rather, it dropped to a deadly, gravelly timbre that effortlessly commanded the massive room without him yielding a single inch of the podium. Leaning in, his eyes locking onto hers with terrifying intensity, he stripped away all the polite congressional titles inherent to Washington political theater. He finally said the name aloud, dropping it like a heavy iron anvil in a silent courtroom. Ilhan Omar. The press cameras clicked in a sudden, frenzied barrage, the strobe lights capturing the ultimate historic showdown as the tension in the room boiled over. You talk about the American dream, Trump mocked, a cruel, brilliantly calculating smile flashing across his face as the relentless, pounding rhythm of a prosecutor closing in for the kill took completely over. What's unprecedented is the sheer, unadulterated audacity. You stand there and demand respect. But let's talk about reality. Let's look at the facts. You come from a country where they have nothing, absolutely nothing but crime, bedlam, filth, a horrible place. He swept his hand broadly toward the stoic wall of heavily armed police officers standing behind him. These men and women build civilization. They hold the line. Your homeland, they say it may be the worst place on earth. Trump took a deep breath. utilizing cold logic as a battering ram to contrast the immense safety of the United States with the absolute warlord-driven ruin of her origins. It's an amazing thing, he continued, shaking his head in mock wonder, his voice echoing with profound theatrical disbelief. She comes to our country, escapes the absolute worst conditions known to mankind, a place run by warlords, and then she has the nerve to tell us how to run the United States of America. She lectures us. She lectures the police. She wants to dismantle the very system of law and order that rescued her from the bedlam. Omar shot back, her composure visibly fracturing under the intense pressure, pointing an accusatory finger back at the podium. There is absolutely no proof to these baseless conspiracy theories. My constituents elected me to uphold the law. The law? Trump interrupted, chuckling a dark, extremely low sound that sent a literal shiver through the press pen. Gripping the edges of the podium so tightly his knuckles turned completely pale, he looked right past her, addressing the American people directly through the television lenses. He was about to take the darkest, most fiercely guarded, and widely suppressed secret of the progressive establishment and drag it kicking and screaming into the official, permanent record of the United States. We have a congresswoman, Trump began, his pacing highly deliberate, slowing down to ensure every single syllable landed with maximum destructive force, who brilliantly came over to the country by marrying her brother. Pure pandemonium erupted. A collective physical shockwave hit the audience. The establishment press scrambled in a panic, producers screaming into their headsets. This wasn't a whispered internet rumor or a fringe theory buried on a right-wing blog anymore. The President of the United States had just weaponized the explosive allegation on national television. Trump did not flinch, standing utterly immovable in the eye of the media storm, staring down the progressive icon and watching the very foundation of her legislative legitimacy crumble to ash under the immense weight of his accusation. Think about the level of corruption, Trump pressed, his voice cutting through the chaotic din, cornering her with cold, hard logic. Think about the blatant, calculated disregard for the foundation of our immigration system. You want to talk about laws, Congresswoman? You want to stand in this room and lecture these brave police officers about what is legal? He pointed a firm finger straight at her, his expression hardening into absolute stone before his final sentence fell like the heavy steel blade of a guillotine. That was the first law she broke, Trump declared, his voice cold and utterly devoid of mercy. And let me tell you, that was the least of them. A violent scrape of mahogany legs against the White House floorboards abruptly shattered whatever decorum remained as Representative Ilhan Omar snapped upward, her posture rigid and her hands visibly trembling with rage and panic. The meticulously curated aura of the untouchable progressive darling had completely vaporized, burned away by the acidic, highly public humiliation of the president's brutal indictment, cornered and entirely stripped of her usual media-sanitized defenses. Her political survival instincts forced her into a desperate, protocol-breaking eruption. This is an outrage. You cannot stand there and defame an elected official. Omar's voice pitched high, vibrating with the rehearsed, theatrical indignation the left-wing networks love to broadcast. She instinctively lunged for the ultimate political panic button, attempting to hide her compromised background behind the Republic's most sacred document. The Constitution gives me certain rights. You are violating, snap. Donald Trump did not let her finish the desperate soundbite, nor did he engage in an undignified shouting match to overpower her shrill protest. He did something far more devastating. He swatted her paper shield out of the air with an aura of overwhelming, suffocating boredom. I can't stand it, Trump cut in, his low, gravelly rumble instantly paralyzing her momentum and freezing her in place. I really can't stand it, as she says. The Constitution gives me certain rights. He mocked her cadence with pinpoint, cruel accuracy, turning her loud cry of victimhood into an absurd, hollow echo. Then he pivoted slightly, completely stopping his focus on her in a calculated gesture of absolute dismissal, turning his attention directly to the blue wall of law enforcement and the blinking red lights of the press cameras. He was about to dissect the progressive establishment's greatest scam live on national television. Look at this maneuver, folks. It is truly a spectacular thing to witness, Trump began, shifting his tone from dismissive to fiercely analytical, dragging the abstract concept of constitutional law right down to the bloody asphalt where real Americans lived and died. When it comes to the border, they tell you the laws don't matter. When it comes to the mobs burning down our businesses, they tell you the laws are inherently oppressive. When it comes to the brave police officers standing right behind me, the radical left tells you that law enforcement itself is a crime. Pacing the stage, his speech tightened into a relentless barrage of short, razor-sharp facts, jabbing a finger into the air as he hammered how they demand sanctuary cities for criminals, cashless bail for violent felons, and systematically dismantle the legal structure that keeps families safe. But the absolute millisecond their own corruption is brought into the light, the very second they are held accountable for the laws they broke to get here, suddenly they are the world's foremost constitutional scholar. Stopping dead in his tracks, the trap fully and inescapably sprung, he looked back at the frozen, humiliated Omar. They treat the United States Constitution like a VIP velvet rope at a nightclub, Trump analyzed, his voice dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. They wave it around to protect themselves while demanding we tear down the fences for everyone else. It is the height of hypocrisy. It is a fraud. As Omar opened her mouth, flushed with trapped panic to regain control of the spiraling narrative, Trump delivered the absolute kill shot that obliterated her geopolitical reality. You want to lecture us about constitutional rights? Trump challenged, his voice dropping to a freezing, lethal register. Leaning heavily onto the podium, narrowing his eyes into dark slits, he delivered a verdict that offered absolutely no quarter. Go back to your own country. Talk about a constitution. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the unmistakable sound of a political career hitting a brick wall. Go ahead, Trump taunted, the words slicing through the East Room like a scythe, speaking directly to the violent, warlord-ravaged reality of the third world she had fled. Go stand in the middle of the bedlam you came from and demand your rights. But you won't. You know why? Leaning directly into the microphone, his final words echoed with the heavy, inescapable weight of a tombstone. They don't have a constitution, Trump declared, staring straight through her. They never will. The silence following the word never was absolute, signifying the complete collapse of a carefully constructed, media-sanctioned political narrative under the crushing weight of geographical reality. Representative Omar stood completely frozen at her seat, the rhetorical wind completely knocked out of her sails, trapped in a paradox she could not legislate her way out of. But Donald Trump was not a man to leave a demolition job half-finished. Sinking the individual was merely the preamble to a much larger war. Pivoting to expose the entire corrupt armada that launched her, he turned his body away, visually dismissing her as a mere symptom and zeroed in on the underlying disease. The atmosphere in the East Room shifted from a targeted interrogation to a sweeping grand jury indictment. But you see, folks, she doesn't operate in a vacuum, Trump declared, expanding his voice and gathering the room for the next massive revelation. She is just one piece of a very dark, very coordinated network that covers for this kind of behavior every single day. They operate like a political cartel. Gripping the edges of the mahogany podium and leaning intimately into the microphone, he brought up Hake Jeff, Hakeem Jeffries, with a wry, almost pitying smile. A murmur of recognition buzzed through the press pen as Trump stripped away the prestige of congressional leadership to expose the sheer incompetence underneath. I said, he's a dumb guy, Trump stated bluntly, anchoring the insult to reality. He's a low IQ person. He was asked about all these critical issues facing our nation, and he was saying things that were so stupid, so basic and so stupid. Stepping back and gesturing widely, Trump masterfully linked Omar's desperate defense to her party's systemic rot, pointing out the staggering hypocrisy of her using the Constitution as a human shield, while her ally called the Supreme Court the very institution designed to protect it illegitimate. He let that highly destructive word detonate. Conceding reasonably that he didn't agree with the court all the time, Trump's voice grew heavier, carrying the profound weight of the presidency, warning that calling it illegitimate destroys the very fabric of American justice and tells the violent street mobs that the rules no longer apply. Scanning the scrambling reporters, He locked onto the blinking red lights to expose the deepest rot of all, the media's complicity. If Donald Trump walked out here and called the Supreme Court of the United States illegitimate, you can imagine what would have happened, he rasped. Everyone in the room vividly pictured the wall-to-wall hysteria, the immediate drafting of impeachment articles, and the hyperventilating anchors declaring the death of democracy. But for him, for the Democrats, there wasn't a big stir. Nothing. Crickets. The press just sweeps it under the rug because they are all in on the same con. The atmosphere in the room turned incredibly tense, crackling like static electricity right before a massive... Their policies are insane. They aren't just bad ideas. They are a suicide pact. And if we let them stay in power, they would drive our country into ruin. The entire dark web of the left had been flawlessly exposed, pushing the tension in the East Room to the absolute explosive brink. The debate was officially over. Without a theatrical pause or a lingering stare to let the progressive wing catch their breath, Trump simply turned his back on them, the ultimate physical dismissal, erasing Ilhan Omar from his field of vision entirely and squaring his massive shoulders directly toward the men and women in uniform. Operating now as the chief executive of the nation, it was time to drop the hammer. You see, folks, this is the fundamental difference. Trump projected, his delivery suddenly rapid, pragmatic, and completely devoid of political fluff. He noted how the other side loves to talk, hold committee hearings, and negotiate with mobs while cities burn. But from day one, his administration made public safety their absolute highest statutory priority. Because when you are dealing with people who want to tear down civilization, you cannot negotiate. You cannot defund the people keeping the wolves at bay and expect anything other than total destruction. You have to act. You need fighters. Gesturing toward Attorney General Todd McGee, the conversational mocking tone vanished entirely, replaced by the crisp, authoritative clip of a commander issuing wartime orders. McGee, you're doing a great job. Todd, he's been good. This was not a proposal for Congress to debate or a bill for Omar to filibuster. It was an ironclad executive decree bypassing the bureaucratic swamp entirely. I didn't ask the radical left for permission to protect our cops. Trump declared, his voice cutting through the room with razor-like precision, laying out an order that left zero room for activist judges or weak district attorneys to offer a slap on the wrist. Delivering the fatal legal blow to the anti-police movement, he announced that the Justice Department was heavily directed to seek the ultimate punishment for anyone convicted of killing a police officer, the death penalty. 100%, Trump asserted, slicing his hand violently through the air to emphasize the absolute certainty of the consequence. That's an easy one. The declaration hit the East Room like a massive thunderclap, a masterstroke of executive power that instantly neutralized the left's entire strategy of appeasing violent rioters into a complete, inescapable legislative checkmate. The message was brutally clear. If you wage war on American law enforcement, the United States government will legally, permanently end you. As the room transformed into a volatile powder keg of overlapping shouts and rapid-fire camera clicks bouncing off the chandeliers, Representative Ilhan Omar made one final, desperate bid for relevance, pushing herself up with a shrill, trembling voice to play to the flashing cameras. This is authoritarianism. You cannot unilaterally dictate the border. You cannot rule by fear and bypass the legislature. The international community will condemn this administration. The international community can foot the bill, Congresswoman, Trump fired back, drowning out her panic effortlessly and staring straight down the network lenses, rendering her completely and utterly invisible. Because while you worry about what globalist committees think of our tone, I am busy actually securing the sovereign territory of the United States. Gripping the podium in a relentless, data-driven offensive, he systematically locked every exit door on her ideology, hammering the undeniable metrics of her open border utopia. 0 illegal aliens admitted through the southern border, deadly fentanyl down by over 60%, and sea entries down by 97% thanks to his task forces. Mocking the left's defense of foreign felons, a ruthless, pragmatic smirk played on his lips. Sometimes their lovely countries will say, "We don't want them." I'll say, that's okay, I slap about a 25% tariff on their country, and you wouldn't believe how fast they call back. We would love to have them back immediately, Mr. President. A massive wave of booming laughter and applause erupted from the officers as Trump boxed Omar's urban policies into a corner of undeniable failure, offering a massive public safety surge to cities like Los Angeles and New York, calling their liberal mayors absolute fools if they didn't actively ask for help. Then, in a masterclass of psychological warfare, the aggressive, rapid-fire tension in his shoulders completely evaporated, the storm breaking into a wide, genuinely warm smile as he turned his entire body exclusively to face the sea of blue uniforms. "You are restoring the foundation of law and order for our country," Trump said softly, echoing with profound, intimate gratitude. "You don't really understand one thing. You don't know how much people respect you. They love you." Letting the thunderous ovation drown out any lingering progressive dissent, Trump raised a hand and delivered the ultimate geopolitical flex to close the historic evening. I told my staff, I'm very busy tonight. I don't have time for dinner. And they said, "Oh, it's the police we're honoring." I said, "Oh, I'll have dinner." As the room roared with laughter, feeding off his magnetic energy, Trump casually tossed aside a top-secret international crisis just to break bread. I'll set aside the Iranians for an evening, and we're going to have a little dinner. As the East Room erupted into a standing ovation and cameras focused entirely on the president shaking hands with the front row of officers, Representative Ilhan Omar was left standing in the periphery, a forgotten, irrelevant ghost buried under the deafening cheers, the opposition utterly humiliated and swallowed whole by the crushing, undeniable reality of American power and justice. But as the deafening applause bounced off the grand crystal chandeliers and the network feeds prepared to cut to commercial, a far darker reality was just beginning to take root in the shadows of the Capitol. The President of the United States had not merely insulted a political rival on television, he had legally mandated the death penalty for the foot soldiers of the radical left and permanently entered the most explosive, career-ending immigration fraud allegation into the official, televised presidential record. The trap had slammed shut, the bait had been swallowed, and as frantic network producers screamed into their earpieces while progressive aides desperately dialed their crisis management teams, one terrifying, unanswerable question hung over the suffocating Washington air. What exactly does a radical political machine do when it realizes it has just been backed into a corner it cannot possibly survive?